you for joining us tonight. My name is Barry Erickson, and I'm Community Engagement Coordinator here at Wheaton Public Library. Tonight, we are delighted to bring you another art demonstration in partnership with the DuPage Art League. Founded over 60 years ago, the DuPage Art League is dedicated to promoting and encouraging the visual arts through classes, workshops, gallery exhibits, and public programs such as this one. We are delighted to the Art League bringing us tonight's acclaimed artist and teacher, Wes Douglas. And here's Sandy Winter to tell you a little bit more about tonight's program.
Thank you, Barry. Hello, I am Sandy Winter, Vice President of Activities at the DuPage Art League. And in partnership with the Wheaton Public Library, we are hosting artist Wes Douglas. As Barry had mentioned, if you're viewing from outside of the Chicagoland area, we would love to know from where you are viewing. Wes is a professional designer, illustrator, virtual note taker, and concept artist who has worked in Chicago area for over 30 years. No, this is not my first time doing this, honestly. He has created new concept designs for SC Johnson, Sara Lee Coffee and Foods, Phillips Oral Health, Allstate Insurance, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, Case New Holland, and many others. Wes has illustrated 2 business books for G. Michael Maddock, wine labels, food packaging, and even coffee shops. He also teaches drawing classes right here in Wheaton at the DuPage Art League, and he's been a member of the Urban Sketchers since 2013. He's led 5 urban sketching workshops with markers, urban vehicles, and urban uglies. That sounds we need to know more about urban uglies, I think, for certain. With all that he does, he still likes to play with Legos, take his dog Nero on log walks, and marvel at beautiful cars, as well as car design. And currently, Wes handles the marketing efforts for a local printing company. Today, he is here to share word portraits and how this graphic form can be used to create some memorable gifts for friends and family. Please help me welcome Wes Douglas.
Can everybody hear me okay? Good. Hi, I am Wes Douglas, guilty as charged. And thank you, Barry, the Wheaton Public Library, and Sandy and the DuPage Art League. Very happy to be here. I thank all of you who showed up in person. Very happy that you took the time out to come visit me, and all of the virtual audience. Thank you for tuning in tonight and all the ships at sea. It's my pleasure to give you a demonstration on what we can do using words and portraits. I'm going to start out with a question for you. What do you give the person who has everything? We all have that person in our life, right? The person who you just like every time it's their birthday or Christmas, you go, oh my God, do they have everything? Or they buy everything themselves. I don't know what to get them anymore. Well, everything that you get them, unfortunately, starts to lose its luster over time. It's one of those things where you get it and you're pretty happy with it, and they get it and they're pretty proud of it. And then over time, they start to, not get so enamored with it, and they fail to tell you that they gave it to somebody else, or that they gave it back to the store or something like that, So it's a chronic cycle. It really is. And even comedian Jerry Seinfeld has a wonderful bit I encourage you to listen to, which talks about how everything we buy is destined to become garbage. It's I didn't do it justice by telling you that, but if you listen to it, it's really funny. And it's so true. So hopefully today with my presentation, I will be able to show you something that you can get the special person in your life that will hopefully not lose its luster over time and not get tired over, and eventually end up in the garbage. So without any further ado, let's go to the first slide. I'm going to share with you a story that I have about one such person that was very difficult to purchase for. This is how it started. It started with this question: Wes, can you help me? And I'm like, oh no. Every time I hear this question, it's always somebody who doesn't want to do something. They're going to try and get me to do it for them. You've probably had that happen to you before. Well, this one happened at work, and it was my colleague, Joe. And Joe had a birthday buddy at our company. Birthday buddy means that you are assigned somebody in the company to celebrate their birthday, however you choose to celebrate it. You get to know the person, you get to know what they like, you get to know what kind of treats they like, if they like pizza or cupcakes, or if they like to go bowling on their birthday or something like that. You know, it's one of those things where everybody, stresses out about, I don't know this person, but you get a chance to learn about them. Well, Joe, being a fairly new employee, he got a guy named Mike, who happened to be the CEO of the company. No pressure. So he's like, okay, I want to do something special for Mike's birthday, but I don't know what to do. Help me. And I said, okay, what are you planning to do? He goes, well, I was thinking of going to everybody in the company and having them give me a word to describe Mike. But I don't know what to do when I collect all these words. So what can I do? And I said, I think I have an idea for you. Joe, let me show you something. And I showed him this picture because just 2 weeks before Joe asked me that question, I found this picture of Paul McCartney. Paul McCartney had an article that was in the Chicago Tribune, and it was advertising a book of Paul McCartney's song lyrics. And it was put into a hard book, and it was just being marketed. And I saw that illustration, and I thought maybe that was the cover of the book, but it was done just for the Chicago Tribune article. And I thought, that's perfect. All the words in there, I could take all those words that Joe is collecting and put them into a portrait of Mike. This will be perfect. So Joe collected everything, and then 2 weeks later, we went to this picture. It took me a little bit of time, because I had to collect the words, and then this is my first word portrait I had ever done. So when it happened, it was, ladies and gentlemen, this is Mike. This is Mike, and this is the portrait that I did of him. So be kind to me. It was my first one, but it was also a good exercise in taking the portrait and putting words in it. It was kind of like a puzzle piece. And so I did this in about 2 weeks' time, and we delivered it to Mike in a framed portrait in front of the company on his birthday. And he was blown away by it. He had never seen anything like this, and he thought it was really, really special. To this day, he still has it hanging up in his office. So that's pretty good, right? I mean, he didn't throw it out. So, okay. And so then we go to the next picture, and Mike had come to me and said, that portrait you did of me, can you do the same thing for my sons? And when that happened, this is the result. So this is Gunnar, and that's Cody. Left is Gunnar, the right is Cody. This was done for Christmas presents. And he wanted the same thing. He gave me all the words. I got the portraits. I traced out the photo. Oops, spoiler alert, I just told you half how I did it. So I took the photos, traced them out, and then put the words in the portrait. That's how this is done. So that's the two. Word portraits incorporate drawing, handwritten text, and possibly color to create one-of-a-kind portraits that you make yourself. Every detail of hair, shadow, clothing, and texture are recreated with words. of paints or crosshatching, and words instead of paints or crosshatching. Sorry, it's my first time speaking in public now. So then we go to the next picture, and then the family circle continues, and we eventually get to the next portrait, which is on the left is Stephanie. Stephanie is the executive assistant to Mike. So we keep it all in the family, right? And this is one that we did this for her birthday. And then on the right side is a woman named Cynthia. She was a client of the company. And you can see now I'm starting to introduce color into these portraits. The handwork is the same. It's just I grabbed different pens to get to the portrait. With Stephanie on the left, I was able to get all the words from her friends, family, loved ones who wrote nice things about Stephanie. Cynthia on the right, I had never met this person. I didn't know anything about her. So I had to be resourceful and find out something about her. And so how did I do that? Well, turns out that she's got a LinkedIn profile. And a LinkedIn profile, if the person is well loved and liked by their colleagues, they write nice things about the people. So I was able to go to all of her reviews and find nice words about Cynthia that were done and put that into a portrait. And we ended up giving this as a gift to Cynthia for participating in a company outing. We go to the next picture. Let's continue on celebrating more employees and work colleagues and people who are friends of the family. I see a little sad face down here. What's that? Okay, so now we have two women. On the left is Maria, and on the right is Tammy. On the left, Maria, she was one of the executives of the company, and I was able to find out about her because she happened to work for the same company that I did. So I ended up, listening to what people said. I went around the company and asked people, what would you say about Maria, and collected all these words and put it in a portrait for her. She had no idea this was coming. She had no birthday coming up or anything like that. It was just something I wanted to do nice for her. Sometimes I'm like that. Sometimes I'm nice. The person on the right, Tammy, is another one of those clients of the company that I knew nothing about. I had never met. But I went to LinkedIn and boy, there's all those words, nice words that people say about them. And I was able to take her portrait and put it into, all the words from the reviews and put it into a portrait. Let's keep it going. Let's go to the next one and see what happens. This is always fun to see what picture is going to be next, and if it works out correctly in the way that I think I put it together, it should be Raph and Kelly. Let's see. I feel like I should do like a, yeah. Okay, so far I have shown you individual portraits of people. This is the first time you're going to see me doing a couple to celebrate their wedding anniversary. This is Raph and Kelly. And they asked me to do a portrait of them to celebrate their, at the time, 18th anniversary. I couldn't have been more honored to do this because they're both really good friends of mine, and I just had a lot of fun putting this portrait together. The examples I'm showing you so far have been people, but in many cases, I curated the words by tapping into loved ones, family, friends, work colleagues, that kind of thing. So it's a lot of fun. And this one I did in two versions. I did the black and white that you see here, and I also did a color version. The color version really only gave color to this watch because he happened to have the most impressive gold watches that he wore, and some color within the clothing that they wore. If we go to the next one, let's see if maybe we can do some more couples. This is fun because I get to see if what I thought I have in here is actually what I showed. Ha, look at that magic. It's awesome. It's so still doing couples. This is on the right is Craig, and in the middle is Molly. These are friends of the company who were going through a bit of a rough patch in their marriage. So this was coming up to a wedding anniversary, and this was a portrait of the two of them to help, put a little love back into the marriage. And it turned out that Craig and Molly's last name happened to be Marvel. And it took all of my willpower not to put a cape on Craig because, Marvel, it's a superhero name, right? Why not? But this wasn't about Craig. It was about them, the couple. So I did the portrait of the couple first, and it went over so well that the two are just, happy, lovey with each other. And then Craig asked me, he says, can you also do our kids? So we did, let's see, what are the kids' names? The kids' names are, I don't have it written down, but they're wonderful kids. I never met them, but they're really great kids. This is the son who is older. He was about 2 years old. He loved tractors. So that's why in his portrait on the upper left, the portrait has a lot of tractor graphics within the words because he just loves construction equipment and farm tractors. Turns out Craig works for a company that makes farm equipment. So there's the connection right there. At the bottom is, I believe it's Gwen at the bottom. This is the daughter who was yet born at the time that I did the portrait of Craig and Molly. So they were expecting this baby. And so 6 months later, they came back to me and says, okay, now can you do Gwen? So now this is the whole family all together, it's not quite Brady Bunch style, but it's certainly, it's a nice portrait. And these were all independent. I just put them together for convenience of today's portrait. All right, let's go on to the next one. Let's see what happens. I had so much fun doing couples that I figured I would just keep doing couples. Why not? 2 for 1. That's a pretty good deal, right? And then you get twice as many words to work with anyways. So this next couple, lots of color, right? This is a couple who convinced me to become an ordained minister long enough to marry them. So I've got that on my resume, which is kind of cool. So, but when they were getting married, I kept thinking, yeah, I'll marry you and all. That's kind of cool, but I really want to do this portrait for you. And they told me that, yeah, we'll get to it. I mean, right now we're kind of planning a wedding right now, so we don't really have time to think about, what our relationship means to each other. So I waited and I waited, married them. They went on their honeymoon, still no words. And finally, I was like, what about the words? And they're like, well, we gave you a few words. So they gave me, I think, all of 80 words, which sounds like a lot of words. It certainly is a lot of effort on their part to come up. It's really hard to think of yourself and write down all kinds of attributes about yourself. So then I phoned a friend and I called their parents. And I said, tell me about, oh, by the way, I didn't introduce you to this couple. This is Tyler on the right and Jess on the left. I married them and I almost forgot their names. So I'm sorry about that. Sorry, Tyler and Jess. Anyways, I went to the parents, and the parents gave me pages and pages and pages of words. They're like, oh yeah, they went to this concert and they got their first date was this and la la la. And so I was like, okay, great. Now I have a lot of words. And that's probably fairly obvious when you look at this portrait, because I had a lot of things to put in there. But because I married them, I also put in part of their vows. So I put that in there as well. That helps fill up a lot of space, which is always nice. So that's the two. I finally gave it to them on their 1-year anniversary. And they kind of knew it was coming, but they didn't. They forgot about it by that point. And when I gave it to them, the best reaction you can get from something like this is when they laugh and they point and they go, oh, I forgot about that. And then, oh yeah. And they talk over each other and they get very giddy and excited and everything. And that's awesome. That's exactly what I was hoping for. All right, so let's go to the next one. By now, I've shown you a lot of portraits, and by now you're probably thinking, that's great, Wes, you've done a lot of people. Do you do anything else besides people? And the answer is yes. So here's a couple of examples. This was for the company I used to work for. We created a lot of ideas for companies, and we had a lot of sayings and cliches that we would use. And so I put those into a monkey, because one of the terms that we used was idea monkey. Idea monkey is somebody who comes up with idea after idea after idea, and they don't worry about whether or not it's a good idea. They just keep going and going. And so that's what happened here. That's on the left side for you virtual audience. For the right side, that was my version of what I am thankful for. So I decided to, I always felt like Thanksgiving kind of got the short shrift because it's quickly bombarded by Christmas. And I thought we need to spend a little bit more time on what we're thankful for. So I took everything that happened in the past year and I put it into that turkey rendering. That's all me just coming up with my memory and putting it together. All right, we'll go to the next one. More objects coming your way, just to let you know. Any questions so far? Okay. So let me introduce you to my dog, Nero. Nero is the one on the left, not the right. And he is a black dog, which thus the name Nero, which when we got him, that was the name from the rescue. We had no idea that Nero in Italian means black. Makes sense now that, but when we first started walking him around the block and people would ask me, where's his violin? Where's his violin? I was like, oh, okay, that's funny, but I don't understand what you're talking about. And then everybody's like, that was that history lesson that I didn't pay attention to. So there was apparently an Italian emperor named Nero who burned Rome down and played the violin during this whole thing, so that was the joke that everybody knew that we didn't. But at the same time, I took, when you do an animal, they don't tell you much about themselves. It's a crazy thing that animals do. You ask them, how was your day? And they look at you like, and they don't say anything. So instead, you have to pay attention to what the humans say about the animal. And that's what I did, as I put all of the attributes of our dog into this portrait, including his DNA test. So somewhere in there, you're going to find, what his makeup is, which is a lot of fun. On the right, however, is obviously a lobster or a crayfish, depending on how you saw it. In our case, it's a lobster. This was for my wife on one of our 35th wedding anniversary. We have a fun term that we borrowed from friends, which is "you're my lobster." And that's our enduring term towards each other. And so what I did is I took a lot of the things that mean a lot to us and put them into a lobster, like our son, our dog's names that we've had over the years, and some other things. So it was kind of a quick little thing. It was to put it on a greeting card, but it was another way of exercising word portraits. All right, let's go to the next one. And let's see what other objects we can find. Oh, look we have student work. So thankful for my students for taking my word portrait class, which is offered at the DuPage Art League. And this is Giro. I hope I'm saying it right. Giro was Mary Ellen Seagrave's dog, and she did this portrait, and wonderful for her first attempt at a word portrait, and did a really good job, particularly because this is a white dog, and it's really hard to do a white dog with black lettering, but she did a wonderful job by using toned paper and some shading. And over here is one of our guests here, Deb Venzel, and I don't know the dog's name. Do you?
I do.
Well, sorry.
Just lost it.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so these are your friends of your sister and husband, and this is their dog. And she did a really cool technique where she did all of the words for the pet in the middle, and she let the people kind of fade out with lighter lines and thinner lines towards the side. Pepper, okay. All right, so virtual audience, Pepper is the winning answer. For any of you who guessed Pepper, you win a cookie. So that takes care of this one, and then let's see who's next. Okay, more objects. So on the left is the core values of our company, our idea company, done in a light bulb, because when you think of ideas, you always think of Thomas Edison and the light bulb, and how light bulbs go off when you come up with a brilliant idea. And so what I did is I took our core values and I put them in that shape just because it made sense for our company. And it was a fun, simple word portrait that I could do. On the right side of this graphic is a company who is in Elmhurst and Oak Park, who started a cupcake bakery company. And it started because of a bake sale to help defer some of the medical costs for one of the two sisters who is going through a lymphoma, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma cancer treatment. So she was going through treatment, and the medical bills were piling up. And the other sister, Laura, had said, in order to help with the medical costs, we're holding a bake sale. Well, the bake sale went so well that it turned into a bona fide company. So they wanted to tell their story to all their customers. And so this is the graphic that I created for them in the shape of a cupcake, because that's kind of their iconic shape for the company. And we turned that into a graphic that would tell the story that they could put on their packaging whenever you ordered cupcakes. Yes, question in the back. Oh, hang on.
Sorry. Were those words all hand lettered?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And
What-
I'm going to tell you how I went about that in just a little bit.
Okay.
Great question, though. Especially like if you look up word portraits on your search engine, you're going to come up with lots and lots of portraits, and they're done very cleanly and very readable. These were all done by hand. Some of them are done through computer apps. We don't do computer apps in our class. So these are all done through hand. Great question, though. Thank you for that. Okay, and then I think we have one more. Another version for Courageous Bakery, because when they started their company, before they had a brick and mortar meaning a storefront. Sorry, sometimes I get into corporate speak and I apologize. When they had their own store, before that, they had a food truck. And this food truck was painted a bright green. The bright green was significant because it signified the non-Hodgkin's lymphoma cancer. So every cancer seems to have a color coding of some kind. You're used to the pink and the red ribbons that people wore early on. Well, there's also a green ribbon that you can wear that signifies this particular strain of cancer. And so this was another version. So they had the cupcake that I showed you before, and then they had this version. Both of them tell the story of their how they got to be the company that they are today. To answer your question in the back, this was half computer type and half hand rendered. So that's why it looks a little bit different, a little bit too perfect. All right, and then let's see, let's try one more and see where it goes. Okay. On the left is what's called a totem tale. Totem tale is one of the artists from the Art League who created these sculptures by gluing a bunch of parts together. If any of you are familiar with the holiday sale that they have at the Art League, this was a regular visitor. This was one of the sculptures that she did. The artist is Linda O'Connor. And she took my class the first time I offered word portrait class. And she said the same thing that I told you before. All right, great. You do a lot of people portraits. Do you do anything besides people portraits? And the answer was yes. And so I took one of her sculptures and I created a word portrait out of her sculpture. That's what is on the left. The right side is not my artwork. I'll just tell you that right now. But I love the style of it, creating mixed drink pieces and using words. So I start to introduce other artists that I'm inspired by, just because it helps inspire my style as well. And then one more, I think. This is how it all began for me. When I was just 6 or 7 years old, I certainly did have a lot of Hot Wheels, and seeing that the Hot Wheels words were put into a shape, and also the Monkeys logo put into the guitar shape. Those were things that I was very inspired by. And at 6 or 7 years old, I didn't know what to do with it, but I sure did like it. And to this day, you've already heard Sandy mention that I'm still playing with Legos and I'm still playing with Hot Wheels. So, obviously it's stayed with me for a little while. So I think that will take us as far as we need to right now. Yeah. Oh, okay. Also not my work. But this is like the king of word portraits. This is Oscar Wilson. He's from England, and he's done wonderful portraits. The thing that I like about his work is that with Barack Obama and this Gil Scott Heron, who's a jazz artist, that he would put words all into the face and everything like that. I just don't have the courage to do that without ruining the artwork, but he does, and it comes out fabulous. So I keep looking at his work as inspiration for what to do with that artwork. And then I think I have one more. This is a friend of mine, also also from England. This is Gary Dad. He does these wonderful, and these are all hand drawn. He does them large, but he does, you know, you've seen Tina Turner and you just recognize her just from the style that he does. But on the right side is a self-portrait of Gary. So that's him. And I asked him if I could use his pictures in this presentation, and he said gladly, because he thought it was so cool. And it's fun because he's inspired by my word portraits as well. So that's the cool thing about the artist community, is we're all like, you know, trying to help each other out, and we're all supportive of each other. So any questions so far? That's pretty much what I've got to show you for examples. Yes.
Just wondering if you have an art background.
Oh, good question. Should I go back to my spot? Okay. Art background, yes. I was self-taught up until about middle school. And then my oldest sister, who's about 5 years older than me, she was sent to art classes. And I was so jealous that I would look over her shoulder when she was doing her homework for the art classes. And I kind of absorbed what she was working on for myself. You know, as a 5-year-old, you're thinking, I should be going to those art classes, you know, but instead she went, and I learned from her, and I did a lot of trial and error, practiced and learned myself until I got to high school. And then I actually took art classes. And, you know, so I'm about 50-50 self-taught and art classes. So yeah, good question. Did that answer it? Okay, yeah. Any other questions? All right. So a lot of yapping by me. So how about we get into how I do these things? You guys want to see a demonstration? Okay. You guys ready for a demonstration? Okay. I'm going over to my spot. Okay. My reference photo. So I told you before that this is Stephanie, and we're gonna recreate Stephanie's portrait today. So you've seen I've already done it, but that doesn't mean it's any easier for me. It just means I did it once before. And so today I get to stumble through it again for your peering eyes. All right, so now we can show my desktop. There she is again. Am I in the right spot? Should I move over? Okay. So step one of doing the word portrait is you start with a nice 8x10 photo. It doesn't have to be glossy. It doesn't have to come from Kodak and, you know, nice glossy black and white. I'm using a photocopy here, and that's perfectly fine. The things you're looking for when you're trying to select your picture is you want to get mostly the head, a bust shot, because any of the detail that you put in the clothing will probably drift off the page, or at least will fade out. So most of the personality is going to come from looking at the face. And a lot of the words that you do are going to be inside the face. Okay, so step one. And for the virtual audience, if you happen to download the PDF, you'll see in the later pages that we have a step-by-step. So, but at the same time, I'm going to go ahead and go through that step-by-step here so that you can see it visually. So you start with your 8x10 photo, and you try and pick a subject that, you know, pretty much depicts the person that you're looking for. You might have several pictures to choose from. You might start with a 3x5 photo. You'll have to enlarge it in order to see the person, but you want to get as much detail as possible. All right, so the second thing you need is a piece of tracing paper. piece of tracing paper can come from something like this. This is a really old cover because I've had this tracing paper forever. This is Parchment 100 by Bang Fang. Bang Fang? Hope I'm saying that right. If not, any tracing paper will do. It doesn't have to be very large. This one happens to be 14 by 17, but it doesn't have to be any larger than the 8 by 10 photo that you're working from. So you can see this thing is so old, I still have blue tape holding it together. So that's the sign of a well-loved sketchbook, just so you know. All right, so I've taken the liberty. I mentioned before that I grew up not only on Hot Wheels and monkeys, but I grew up on Ray Rayner, which is a TV show that used to be on Channel 9 when I was a kid. And Ray Rayner always had these segments where he created crafts. And crafts, you'd watch the camera and his big sausage-like fingers would sit there and work with glue and string and all kinds of stuff. And he would try to put something together that would turn out to be some kind of a arts and craft thing. And then you realize he would botch it. And then he would reach over and say, and this is what it should look like. And somebody had already done it nicely, so the way, so I'm kind of doing that today, but I'm going to do this demonstration and I'm used to having people just shout out questions or ask me questions while I'm drawing because silence drives me crazy. So if you have questions, feel free to ask, and Barry and Sandy will either run up to you with a microphone or they'll see it online and then ask me as I'm drawing. And then we'll go from there, and I'll try to talk as I'm demonstrating.
Wes, there was one quick question back to the slides. Someone was asking the name of the second English artist. It was a gentleman with a cap on, and it was someone who provided inspiration for you.
The second artist was Gary Dadd, D-A-D-D.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's the artist, and I think that might also be his Instagram handle if you wanted to look him up that way. Okay, so far we've gotten step 1 and step 2 out of the way, kind of. So step 2 is tracing paper. You put tracing paper over your photo reference. And we have a photo reference of Stephanie, and you want to trace it. I like to trace with a different colored pen than what I'm going to trace again in the next step. Let me explain. So I'm using a red Sharpie. You can use a red ballpoint pen. You can use blue, green, whatever color you have. The idea is that you do it in a different color so that when you retrace this tracing again, that you keep track of where you're at. That's often the hardest thing to do. All right, so hopefully my head doesn't block the thing. I'll just come in from the side. One of the things I find that I really like with longer hair is that I'm looking for areas that I can fit type. So if I'm drawing these lines in like this, I'm also thinking about where I'm going to fit type into the drawing. So sometimes these lines can get very close to each other, and sometimes they can get farther away from each other. I'll show you what to do about that in just a little bit. If any of you in the in-person studio are watching me right now, you see I've kind of contorted in order to do this drawing at the table. Normally I'm sitting down, so I'm not looking quite so awkward, but anybody who says that art isn't an athletic sport is kidding. I want to hear Sandy to make me sit down. Sit down. Don't drive us crazy with your standing up, drawing and perching. You'll throw your back out. If here I'm tracing on a piece of tracing paper, and it is also, I can see everything that I need to trace. But if you have the luxury of a light box, you can use the light box as well. And then some of the detail that's harder to see from direct tracing, you can see it a little bit easier if you use a light box. I'm just trying to be a tough guy and do it without. One of the things that when you're tracing a photo that you might wonder is, does the drawing have to be perfect? And the answer is no, because you're going to trace it again and again. And each time you trace it, you're going to be able to fix it and clean it up as you go. I don't do watercolor normally, but I think watercolor or painting is one of those things where you can do a really yucky job penciling it out, but you can fix it in the painting. So this might be one of those situations where you can fix it as you get further into the process. Can everybody see okay? One of the questions I often get too is, should I do this to music? And if I'm at home in my studio, I would say, absolutely. You know, when you're doing a painting at home or you're drawing at home or working anywhere, if you have the news on in the background and that doesn't distract you, then you have the news on in the background. But I prefer, I grew up, my favorite movie was Breaking Away, which happened to do with a couple of kids from Indiana and one of them wanted to be an Italian bike racer. I just loved that movie, and the soundtrack was wonderful because it was Vivaldi and you know, all the Italian masters. And so a lot of classical music is a big part of that movie, and it's a good series of music to work with, you know, when you're drawing. It depends on what I'm drawing too. If I'm drawing something where there's a lot of cross-hatching involved, I might pick something like Van Halen or something a little bit louder, a little bit more aggressive. So I tend not to only do classical music, but sometimes if you want it to be quieter and you don't want to, you know, get too distracting. If for some reason you can't see what you're drawing because it's too dark or the values are too close together, you can always lift up like that and say, oh, that's what's going on there. So I do a lot of that and check my work from time to time. So hopefully that came across online as well. But one of the comments that I remember from doing that first portrait that I showed you, Mike, if you recall, one of the things he said was, these are great because if it doesn't look exactly like the person, it doesn't matter because the artwork of the words means so much more to that person than whether or not it looks like that person. And at the time, I didn't think it was like a dig. And actually, I still don't think it's dig. I made it sound like that. But it's actually one of the beautiful parts about doing this is that you can do a portrait and the person that you give it to will still do that. Oh, that is so awesome. This, and it's because they gravitate towards all the memories that you put into their portrait. Because I'll be the first one to tell you, I'm not a portrait artist. If you ask me to grab my pencils and do a nice graphite portrait of somebody, probably somebody's going to say, yeah, it doesn't look like them. But I'm used to that. I've recovered. And so now I do these instead. So every line that I'm doing, I'm trying to remember that words are going to go into these spaces. So even the earring here, I'm probably going to put words inside of here, and it may be too hard to see on screen, but it's really tiny. I can still put words in there. And every strand of hair. You'll tell me if I'm blocking the screen, right?
We're just wondering, as you're tracing, are you focusing more on creating the lines and shapes or the lines or like shapes to fill with words?
Good question. I'm looking at lines that I can put words in eventually. So I may gloss over some of the fine details. Like if I look at this and I see hair flying away in different directions, or it's curling here or something like that, I may gloss over that or simplify that in order to make sure that I can still put words in. Because if I have to follow every strand of hair and I start following it with words, it's going to look even crazier by the time I add words to it. So I tend to simplify a little bit just because it works better for the portrait. And did I tell you that artists have this thing called a creative license, which means that you can make things the way you want it to, and in order to satisfy the goal, which is to do this portrait. So sometimes I will whip that out. I'll just say, yeah, creative license. Okay. Any questions on this so far? Looks pretty simple, right, everybody? This is probably pretty basic drawing, right? All right, so now I have my tracing, which looks like this, and it's in red. And I'll tell you why I do that in just a little bit. But one of the questions that I get a lot is hand lettering. Hand lettering, how do I do hand lettering when I'm not so good at hand lettering? Well, there's an exercise that I like to do, and it looks like this. Oh, wait, first you have to develop your list of words. So here is some of the words for Stephanie. These are all copied from the emails, and they're assorted emails. So rather than show you all the assorted emails that came in different size type and things like that, I rewrote them out here so that you get some idea of the kind of words that people will come up with to describe this person. When you are working on a portrait like this and you want to create a list of words and you're kind of left to your own devices, like I was on a couple of those portraits where I went to the LinkedIn profile and things like that. Sometimes when I'm asking the subject, let's say it's Stephanie, I'm doing a portrait of Stephanie and I'm going to ask Stephanie, tell me about yourself. And she'll say, oh, I don't know. And she can't think of anything. And I will ask her questions like, tell me when you were born. And she'll give me a date. And then I said, tell me where you were born. Where did you grow up? What was your friend's name in elementary school? What was the name of your elementary school? What was the name of your parents? What are your brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles, nephews and nieces? And all of a sudden, you start developing this list of all kinds of attributes. And this kind of list here is more what other people think of that subject, of Stephanie. So these were all from family and friends. And, you know, you'll see things like giving, kind, friend, mama bear, you know, hugs and kisses, genuine, bubbly. So there's all these really personal words that mean a lot to the person when you put them in the portrait. So we have a list that we've developed, and it's a pretty good list. I mean, this is you can work with a list like this. Then you need to practice lettering. So we practice lettering. And it doesn't matter what you write, but a good sentence that is often used that people will use to exercise and practice lettering is the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. That is called a panagram, something like that. It's what it is. It's a sentence completely made of every letter of the alphabet. So the idea is that you're practicing every letter of the alphabet while you write this funny sentence. There are other sentences that you can use that are similar, like when zombies arrive, quickly fax, Judge Pat. It makes no sense at all, but all that this author considers is that you've got every letter of the alphabet accounted for when you're writing. And so you want to practice each letter, and you write this over and over again. Writing in straight lines across like this is certainly one of those things that is really easy to do. However, when you go to your portrait, and there are hardly any straight lines, they're all a bunch of curved lines and a bunch of lines that weave into each other, then you start to take these straight line sentences and work them into curvy line sentences. You want to practice working with words that get larger and smaller, because sometimes the areas that you are writing in will pinch each other. Sometimes they'll expand, and sometimes they'll wrap around different parts of the body. So this is an example of what it could look like as you're practicing doing the person. And it doesn't have to be your actual subject. It can just be a bunch of curvy lines so that you're practicing different types of lettering and getting your arm to move around different shapes. These lines here at the top of the drawing, that's what the lines look like. So much like the tracing I did in red of Stephanie at the beginning, these lines are going to be a lot of the same type of lines where they're very curvy, very wavy, and will give me a lot of practice at changing the angle of my letters as I go through here. Questions? Easy peasy, right? This is no big brainer. I know you're a smart group of people, so you probably, this is like, oh, no big thing. So, okay, so we have. What do you do now with this tracing that we have of Stephanie? You look at it and you go, I'm not done. Because look at, I forgot her chin. So I need to come back here and double check my work and make sure that I've completed my drawing before I can go any further. That looks pretty good, right? Good enough? Good enough for government? All right, let's move on. Now, the next step. By the way, here's an example of the email that I got with all the different words. Pages and pages of words. So all those words that I wrote down previously came from this list here. I just keep them over here next to where I'm going to do my portrait so that I can refer to them. So now we have our tracing of Stephanie, and we're going to transfer this drawing onto a blank piece of paper or our drawing surface. The first time I ever did this, I did it all in pencil so that I can practice lettering and practice figuring out which words I'm going to put where. So I worried a lot about, okay, where's the first word I'm going to put down and how do I do this and where's it going to fit? And the more I did these portraits, the more I realized it just doesn't matter. It just start by putting words down. But in order to put the words down, I need to create this drawing onto this blank piece of paper. So there's two ways I can go about that. Number one is what's called carbon transfer. Does everybody know what carbon transfer is? Okay, so for the benefit of those who have never heard of carbon transfer, I will give you a quick demo just to. Okay, let's pretend this little design here is the thing I'm going to trace. Now, I'm going to take some kind of graphite. Number 2 pencil works just fine. Any kind of pencil works fine. Graphite is all that's required. Flip over your drawing and you scribble on the back. So for those of you that this is already old news, I apologize. I just want to make sure that everybody in the audience, I don't make any assumptions that everybody knows exactly what's going on. So I figured there's always one person that's never heard of this before and never seen this before and probably wants to see how it's done. Carbon transfer means that you take this and you put the pencil side down and you trace. So remember I told you I traced in red first? Now I'm tracing in a black ballpoint over the red, and I can keep track of where I left off. Because when you're drawing something as complicated as a person's face, it's real easy to like think, oh, I already did that. And if you don't keep track of where you're at, and you go to lift up that tracing paper, you've lost your spot. And then it's like, okay, now I got to try and figure out where to put this back on in place so that it lines up. So carbon transfer is simply this. I put scribble pencil on the back side and then you draw through it and it's like, you know, carbon transfer. Okay. Simple, elementary, but not so elementary if you've never seen it before. Okay. there is yet another way to do carbon transfer, and it requires grabbing something like this. This is wonderful stuff. This is transfer paper. It's called Sorrel, and I received no kickback from this company, so this is not me trying to advertise for them. It's something that I discovered once, and I said, magic! I don't have to scribble on the back and get all that gray carbon all over the place. Instead, you have this roll of paper that comes in different colors. Comes in a roll of paper like this. And on it, it has like a chalky surface to it. And that chalky surface allows you to, when you put pressure from a ballpoint pen or something, it gives you the same effect as the carbon transfer that I just did. So that same process can now be used if I was to
Excuse me, Wes, is that transfer paper roll available at most art supply stores?
I only found it at Blick's, but I never looked for it at like Hobby Lobby or Michael's. But it's definitely at Blick's. So you can definitely find it there, and it's always in the pencil section.
Great, thank you.
And this is the Ray Rayner portion where I've already done something ahead of time. So this is where I've already traced it out, and I have the Sorrel underneath it. So also, when I trace out the drawing in red, and I have the blue Sorrel underneath it, which is my preference. You can get gray, you can get red, but if you get red and you use your line drawing in red, it's really hard to see where you've been. So I just like to use some contrasting colors as a result. So now we have Stephanie in red, and we're going to transfer Stephanie in red onto the white paper. And you can see from the tracing of the drawing that I've done, I simplified it to be just lines because I'm going to put words inside of those lines, at least for most of it. And Barry, if there's any questions, this is a great time for that, because otherwise we get awkward silence of watching me draw.
Any questions from our in-person audience?
That's a great question. No, I'm just kidding. No, nobody asked a question, so I apologize. I keep forgetting that we have a virtual audience, and let's pretend that somebody did ask a question, they wouldn't have been able to hear that question. So I'm just being a goofball.
Someone is asking, how does the darkness versus lightness and thin and thickness of lines or words come into play?
That's a good question. The darkness happens, if I understand the question correctly, the darkness happens in the shading of the picture. So here I've got some darkness and I've got some lightness in here. And so I'm going to pick pen sizes in order to try and replicate that level of value. So obviously I want this to be as dark as possible, but I want it to be lighter in the highlight area. And I want to create that kind of contrast in the pen work that I use. So I don't want to go too heavy up in this area here because then it will start to look like she's a brunette. And I want to convey that she's a blonde. Whereas the shadow areas, you would want to create a little bit more value by using a thicker pen or a lot less spacing between the letters. Find out if that actually answers the question.
Sure, if we need to clarify, please feel free to type the question again into the chat or Q&A.
One of the things you'll notice in this particular line drawing that I've done is right underneath her neck. You notice her neck has shadows, but I've created the shadow by creating lines in order to put type there. So that's a trick that I can use if I want to create the shadow that comes from the chin underneath here, especially if the light source is coming from above her head. I want to be able to convey that feel with type. And because of that, I want to be able to add some type that is on lines rather than like Gary Dad had done where I use long stretchy letters, you know, and I'm not as confident with that in the results. So I tend not to do that. It works for him though. He's amazing. But for me, I like to just play it safe sometimes. Because one thing that happens is I'm not always given a lot of time to do these because the birthday creeps up on you or the Christmas creeps up on you, you know, so you have to work very quickly and get these portraits done. I just finished one this week and the person who ordered the portrait said, I need this with a quick turnaround. That's probably poison to most artists' ears. Like, deadline? But I'm okay with that. And I was like, okay, if a lot of the time-consuming part of this is coming up with the words. So if the words are already provided to me, then that's half the battle. Then it's a matter of me doing this process right here, where I'm trying to get all the lines down and put the type into its place.
Do you have a certain number of words kind of as a goal that you want to have available to you or on deck before you start working on the portrait?
Yes. I always say 200. I just pulled the number out of the sky. But sometimes that number might be hard to achieve, and sometimes people overachieve it. The reason I ask for so many words, which seems daunting to a lot of people who have to produce the words, is because in a portrait like this, and a lot of the portraits that I do, I write in such a way that the words fill up the space very quickly, but they don't fill it completely. So I have to repeat words. And when I repeat words, I look for places where I can repeat them without it being easily detected. Trying to be a little sneaky about it. So if somebody says magnanimous or phenomenal or something that stands out and it's written close to their lips or their eyes, I don't want to put it in their eyes and their lips. I want to put it somewhere like in their hair or someplace where I can bury it, and so that it's not as easily detected that I repeated the words. The other thing I find is when I'm doing these portraits, very often you get multiple viewings of it. You get the initial look from the person, and they'll look at it and they they will focus on the words that stick out to them first. And they'll go, oh, okay, empathetic, caring, loving. Or they focus on those words first because they're close to their eyes. Any of the most important words I put right close to their eyes. Any of the lesser important words I will put further out. And if I'm repeating, I'm putting them further out into the hair, into the clothes, just because I know that I am repeating them and I don't want people to say, hey, you just repeated that word 6 times. I go, no, I didn't. But I'll try to, disguise it as best I can. So a long way of answering your question, 200 words is what I always ask for. Whether I get 200 words to work with isn't always the case, but I'll work with whatever I get. So if you're thinking of doing one of these on the train into Chicago, it probably will take you a little bit more time than that, as I'm demonstrating here. Even with as much as I talk, it still takes a little bit of time because I haven't figured out a way to shortcut some of these steps without it producing a better portrait. Sometimes when you draw and you draw and you speak at the same time, you don't make as much sense. So if anybody was confused by that last sentence, please let me know.
As you're looking at the words and phrases provided to you, do you select certain ones that you want to be more dominant on the portrait?
Yeah, there's a couple things that I will do. I will look at the space that I need to fill, like this eyebrow right here. I will look at it and say, it's about a medium-sized word. So if I go back here to the list, cool, I can do this now. If I go back to this list here, which you can only see a portion of, and I see respectfulness, I will pencil it in respectfulness just to see if I can fit it in. And if I can't, then I will pick another word like compassion. All right, compassion will work. C-O-M-M. And I will pencil that word in just to see if it'll fit, because that seems like an important word. And then I want to be able to make sure that it fits. I do occasionally run out of space for words, and I'll just like let them drift off into the hair or something like that. Or if it's too small to read anyways, I'll go ahead and, write it in. But sometimes, like especially around the eyes and around the lips, that's the prime real estate, if you will. And I want to be able to make sure that it works and that it's legible. I don't want to like cut the word off like compassion, or something like that. So I would rather have that word read in full, even if I have to shorten up the way that I make the letters. Maybe I'll do a demonstration just to try it. All right. C-O-M-E. Of course, everybody at home is following along with this, right? They're all trying to see if they can get compassion to work in here. So this word, compassionate, and use it in a sentence, please. No, if you get it to fit in there, you've succeeded. And if it doesn't fit, the beauty of this Sorrel is that it's erasable. So if I've gone through here and I've written it in and it doesn't fit, I'll come in here and I'll erase it. I'm looking for my eraser, and I'm like, of all the millions of art supplies that I bought today, eraser. That's pretty basic, right? I think it's over in the backpack still, and I just didn't bring it over here to the table. But this erases very easily, which makes it wonderful for start, restart, and collect. But you can see the line drawing is pretty clear from this Sorrel. You can see the offset over here. Hopefully you can see that at home as well. But it's like a little negative drawing that all the offset from the blue dye or the blue chalk comes off on the paper. And let's hope I didn't move it. But I make mistakes a lot, so I'm okay with it. You gotta embrace mistakes, because that's the only way you're going to learn. So I will go ahead and finish this off. Right here, the cheekbones, I have these little half circles right at the cheekbones. And you may be wondering, I'm only drawing a single line. Why is that? And I will show you. Because old Wes has a method to his madness. Same with down here. I just have single lines that I'm using because I know that the sweater that she's wearing is mostly white, but I just want to be able to indicate where the shadows of the folds are in the drawing. All right, I think I've got most all of this traced. Let's see what kind of crazy drawing I have now. Not too bad. Okay, so that's what it looks like when you trace from Sorrel and red drawing to black pen onto transfer. So now I've successfully transferred the drawing. Now, let's talk about some drawing equipment. Before I get into drawing, one of the questions you're going to have is, what kind of pens do I use? What kind of markers do I use? That kind of thing. For most of what I do, I use this Uniball Vision Micro. I love this pen, and I hope they don't discontinue it, because if they do, I'm one of those artists that's going to be like, oh, what did they do? Why did they improve it? Because inevitably when they improve it, it doesn't work as well as the original. And this is the OG for me right here. So I want to be able to use this. This is a gel pen. The gel pen that for me works really well, and it doesn't smear like some other pens that I will use that continue to stay wet. The other pen that...
Excuse me, Wes, could you say one more time what that one is so I can type it into the chat?
Uniball
Mhm.
Vision Micro, which I think means it's like a 0.05 millimeter, something like that. I'm looking on the pen to see if they... Micro is the new direction. Yeah, is how they describe it.
So
Yeah.
Wes, you use ballpoints for everything you do, not fiber points or fountain pens or anything like that? Is that what I heard you said? You always use gel pens, ballpoints.
Yeah, I do. And when it comes to transferring, because you're pressing through your tracing, I want to make sure that I can put some pressure on it in order for the blue to offset into my drawing surface. When I've used felt tips, I can't put as much pressure on it because I can compress the point. If I put too much pressure on it, Felt tips, they work really well for tracing, but they don't work as well for tracing through the carbon. And this Sorel actually doesn't require much pressure, but I think I'm a creature of habit. So I'm like, I only want to do this one time. So I'm going to go ahead and use a ballpoint and trace through it. Once I get it to this point here, then I'll use a gel pen. I might also use a Pilot razor point. Got that, Barry? Pilot razor point is another one of these fine tip felt tip. Say that 3 times fast. Fine tip felt tip pen. It works really well. It also soaks into the paper so that it doesn't smear when you go to draw. For years, I've used a Sharpie Ultra Fine Point. Blix is going to be so happy when I send all you people to there, with this big shopping list. But you really don't need all these different types of pens. But it's nice to have different pens for different weights, different densities, so that you can do the shadows and you can do the highlights without having to worry about putting different pressure on it to get your darks and lights. For the lightest, I'll use this Pilot razor point. And sometimes you can go to this. I'm just going through my art supplies list now. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, I don't mean to make you guys get like hundreds of pens, but you probably own a lot of these pens anyways. But this is a 0.35. It's a Japanese pen that was gifted to me from one of my students in the last word class that I did. And it's really good for doing really fine point lettering. Let me see if I can demonstrate for you.
Someone's also asking about micron pens.
Microns are great. Yeah, and that one, if you get a pack of 5 of them, you'll already have the different thicknesses of the pens. So it works really well just by having a set of them. Speaking of which, here's a set that from Molotov. I'm not as practiced on saying this, but I always want to say Molotov cocktail, but it's not that. It's just one of these where it comes in multiple different thicknesses. And that way, that would be great if you just bought this set and used it on your portraits. The question might be, do you always have to do black and white for these portraits? I find black and white is easier because it takes the subjectivity out of using color. Sometimes you use color and you're like, that wasn't the color I wanted. But if you do use color, and I apologize for bouncing all over the place right now, but I love art supplies. Here's a good set that you can use. Tombow. Tombow is great because they have 2 different points and these are readily available at most all art supplies stores. I got these at Michael's, and if you time it right, they'll have them on sale, which is always, music to my ears. But if you don't, then these are still really useful, especially if you're going to do color portraits. Color portraits are great if you have a color reference photo and you're going to try and replicate that color in the hair, in the clothing, in the eyes, that kind of thing. Did you get Tombow?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, all right.
Yeah. And while we're talking about art supplies, someone is asking what type of paper you use.
Yeah. So I use. How did my page get so far out of whack here? I must be pushing on it or something. I'm sorry about that, people. I must be driving the OCDs crazy. Like, straighten up the board. Anyways, I will sketch on a watercolor paper, usually a smooth or a relatively smooth tooth. You don't want to go too watercolory because it has all the divots and the bumps in it. And when it comes to lettering, it's going to be a lot more difficult to do your lettering when you're going over moguls and divots and things like that, you know. So you want to keep it as smooth as possible. A little bit of tooth is good. You can also work on Bristol. For this demonstration here today, I'm using a drawing paper sketchbook, but that's just for the demonstration. But this paper here is a watercolor paper that I was using. So look around, see what kind of paper you have in your studio, and generally pick something that's going to be smoother rather than bumpier, just because it'll make you much happier when you go to do your lettering. All right. So we've already, any more questions? Wait till I get going. There's going to be all kinds of questions. Anyways, we're going to go ahead and let's say bye, Stephanie. It just blew off the table. That's okay. I am done with that part. Okay, so this is what I was looking for. And it's nice to have them side by side, because then I get to say, okay, now I know where my darks are, where my lights are, and try to figure out where I'm going to put some of my words. Now, if I've already done this once before, I can use my previous drawing as a guide for where to put words. But I'm going to pretend like I've never done this drawing before, and I'm going to just base off of spacing and size of words where I'm going to put some of these words. All right, so we have words like, we have a lot of length here because the glasses are already dark rim glasses. So I know that I can put in a lot of words in here, but they're not going to be very tall because the size of the frame. So let's do this, right? Okay, so the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. I have to just keep reminding that. Respect. This is one of those areas where it's certainly permissible and advised that you look back at your word list, because you get into it and you can easily start to misspell things because your mind starts talking as you're starting to write out words, and then you start doing like I start doing and start saying other words that have nothing to do with what I'm working on, and then you start misspelling things. I can also figure out that that first pen that I was using for the size that I was using was starting to blend the letters together to the point where they were illegible. So that's when I made the choice. From over here, it's a little bit blobby. And it made sense at the time when I started to do it, but lucky you get to see me make some mistakes in front of you so that I can tell you how I thought about it and how I plan to fix it. So I switched to my Uniball, my trusty Uniball, because now I can actually read those words that I'm putting in here. When I have successive words that run right up next to each other, I will put a little bullet or a dot between them. That's how I separate it, because if I put white space between words, then the white space, funny as this may sound, the white space looks like something else other than a space. It looks like I'm purposely leaving a highlight or some other function in there, and I don't want that. So I fill in that gray matter with a dot. So I'm going back to my list here, and now we're going to put in another long word just because I can.
Wes, someone is asking, what do you do if you make a mistake? Say the letters are a little blurry or there's a misspelling.
Mhm. Ancient Chinese secret. No, what I usually do is I make sure that I have a white gel pen handy. And that's one of the main reasons why I like to use white paper when I'm doing my black and white portraits, because you can make corrections and it doesn't stand out like a sore thumb. If I was doing these portraits on a toned paper, I might I might have a little bit of problem. So I like to keep it on the white paper just because corrections are much easier to make. Good question, though. So do your portraits on white paper, if at all possible, and also keep some white out or some Doc Martens or white gel pens handy in case you need to fix some of your lettering or a typo in the process.
And just for your pacing, no, we've got another 20 minutes or so.
Yay! Only 20 more minutes of me, everybody. That's all you need. So this is the time to ask me all kinds of questions like, what am I thinking, while I'm doing these things? Hopefully I'm trying to think about nothing more than this portrait, because otherwise spelling problems happen. And thank you for zooming in, because this is really small stuff here. You guys ever use the squint test? Squint test is one of those things where you need to give yourself distance from your artwork. So you just kind of squint at it, and it helps you to determine where your darks and lights are. And then you can determine if you need to add a little bit more darker or add a little bit lighter in order to fix the drawing.
Someone's asking, how do you make decisions about the direction of the lettering?
Another good question. What I like to do is imagine that the letter is going across the surface that I'm writing on. For example, I'm going around these glasses right now, and the plane is facing perpendicular to me. So it's going to be pretty straight on. When I go and do the lettering in the hair, I'm going to turn the page. I'm going to turn the letters so that it follows the flow of the hair. When it comes to the chin and the shape, many times I'll try to follow as if those letters are standing right along the chin here or right along the cheek or something like that, So it's one of those things where I like to pretend like every one of these letters are like little ants marching on the face. Okay, that's a weird analogy. Okay, but that's how I think about it, and it's no disrespect to the person that I'm drawing, but it's also a nice way to think about it, just to get your mind. And I try not to go too much smaller than this size type here, because, oh, did you see that? Oh, look at that. I got the thing to fit in perfectly. And that's because as I'm writing, I'm also checking to see where my endpoint is. And am I going to fit it in? And if not, I'm going to start scrunching those letters just a little bit in order to make it fit perfectly within there. Anyways, I was saying something about, I like to just make sure that I can fit all the words in the space that I've given it, or that I've determined for it. And then maybe it will follow the look of the face, and it'll help give it some shape as well.
How do you know where to shade?
Where to shade? This tells me. So I can always go back to my original photo reference, and I'll know this is a little bit darker than the highlight on the nose, or the highlight on the forehead, so that's one of those, if you have a color photo that you're working from, it works really well to convert it to black and white, just so that you can start seeing gray tones, and you can start simplifying dark, light, mid-tones, slightly darker, that's where I can determine where my shading is to go back to this, because if I just imagine it, it's going to be really difficult, and then everything's going to be the same. So does everybody follow what I'm doing here so far? It's okay if I jump to the end then? Okay, so this is how it gets started, right? We've gotten to the point where we've done our black and white. We did our tracing. We have our Sorrel or our carbon transfer. We transferred that onto the page so that we can do our drawing. And then after 4 weeks, no, I'm just kidding. After a while, we will have something that looks like this. And if you were to compare this drawing, against the one that I just did, you would say, hey, you didn't use the same words, Well, that's just, I was trying to pretend like I had never seen this drawing before. But this is the end result. This is, again, we're talking about how to determine shading, how to determine values for different areas. This is how I handled highlights on somebody who has light hair. And this is how I handled the darker stuff. The darker stuff I can use the Sharpie fine points even, to get a little thicker line in there. Or go back to my Molotow and go with my 1 millimeter pens. It's a matter of experimenting, and I highly recommend, if you have a scrap piece of paper, do some writing off to the side, test out your pens before you go right to your portrait, just so that you can test it out before you go, too much, or that wasn't what I wanted, or that's too light. If it's too light, no problem. You can always go darker. It's when you go too dark and you want to go lighter, that's when you have to pull out the whiteout, or you have to just work around it. Sometimes you can work through a mistake and build it into the portrait.
Someone is asking for a little bit more information about how you tackled the hair, the direction, maybe the thickness of the line.
Yeah, good question. I have, you can see, remember when I did this, if I understand the question correctly, when I was doing my drawing, you could see where I was doing some tapered shapes here, like this one right here. I had some lines that kind of converged towards the base here. A lot of areas where the type would pinch, I would try to figure where those were going to work so that I would leave the spaces in between as my highlights, especially for something like this where I needed to have lighter hair or highlights. And I use the lighter pen and build up to heavier pens if I need it to be darker in the shading area of here. This was kind of a risky move here, was to have the shading right on the chin, but I was trying to be like Gary Dad and, do the long stretchy letters to fill in the shading on the chin area. I hope that was satisfactory to that person. If not, please ask it more specifically. That would be great. Yes.
Wes, as good as you are with urban sketching and really nailing the essence of someone's face, I'm surprised that you don't just freehand draw. Do you ever draw or do you always trace?
When it comes to the portraits, like I mentioned before, I'm not as good as you might think when it comes to drawing a likeness of somebody. So I like to give myself a fighting chance by at least tracing directly from a photo. And even then, I will tell you, even then, I will have somebody say, "That's a great drawing. It doesn't look like her." And so all that effort that I put into it, I'm thinking it's a pretty good drawing. Looks just like Stephanie, I think. And then the person who I give it to, or the person who orders the portrait, will see something else in the person that I did not capture in the portrait. And that's the risk. That's the side effect of what happens, And if that happens, I just, sometimes I'll go back and fix it. There goes Stephanie again. So you put these two together and I'm thinking, wait.
I can zoom out.
Yeah. So you put these two together and I see a lot of similarities. I see a lot of, okay, it's her. Maybe I didn't get her crooked teeth. I tend to try not to be that specific in a portrait. I go, yeah, maybe she doesn't have perfect teeth, but I'm not going to emphasize that by making a drawing with crooked teeth. I don't know that when you meet Stephanie, you're going to say, that kind of looks like her, but her teeth are more crooked. That's not one of the things that most people would say about, especially somebody that is very special to them. They're going to say, those eyes, she wears those glasses. Her eyes are bright and sparkly like that. She has that big smile. They might come back and say she needs a bigger smile. And so that might be one of the things that they would do. But freehand draw, I should be better. I just, when it comes to this, I like I said, I just like to give myself a fighting chance at getting the portrait as accurate as possible. Maybe one day. I'll do this again next year and we'll see if I'm freehand drawing it.
We do have a couple more questions. Do you ever use gray markers?
Yes. Gray markers are an awesome way to get those highlight midtones if you don't have a really fine micron or that Japanese pen that I showed you that's a 0.35. If you don't have that and you still want to create something like this, or you want to create something in their clothing that is more subdued, I have used grays before. I think in some of those earlier pictures I showed you from the slide, where I did Cody and Gunner, I used a lot of gray in those portraits because it was still a thick pen, but it also, I wanted to create some variance in the values.
You erase the blue transfer lines or do you leave them in?
Yes, I will erase the blue transfer lines. Every artist likes to get rid of their cheat lines if possible, or you know, if I photocopy, I don't have to get rid of the blue lines because the blue lines will disappear in a black and white photocopy. But if I'm giving them the original that I used the blue lines, I'll erase it. Plus, it helps clean up a little bit. You know, it's easier to see some of the words when you don't have the blue lines kind of muddling it up a little bit.
And do you tend to use the same font?
Oh, the West font? Yeah. Yeah. I occasionally I will use a script font if I want to create some variety within the portrait and it makes sense for the portrait that I'm doing. I don't have any good examples here other than this example that I showed you in the slide. I created some variety by having some script fonts within the sans serif and the serif fonts. That was just to create some variety in the font. This I'm going to bring back because we talked about whether I use gray or not. There's an example where I used gray in the portrait. And so I do use, especially like if I'm doing color, I use gray, but I can also use it in black and whites as well.
Okay, someone is asking, do the razor point pens ever bleed if the paper gets damp?
It might. I've never done that before. And you know, I try not to get them wet, but you know, best laid plans, right? And one time I had a sketchbook in my backpack and I also put my coffee thermos in the same backpack and I put it in the back seat of my car. And then I took a turn a little bit hard and the whole backpack tipped over. And as I took that turn, I heard it go thump. I'm like, I hope I closed my coffee cup. And that was a case where I did not, and it went blah, 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 blah. And so everything in my backpack got wet, but the sketchbook did not, which was miraculous. I don't know how that happened, but you know, working with Sharpies tends to keep it from bleeding. But when you work with microns and some of these other gel pens, they are water based to a point, and some of them, after they dry, they're water resistant. So sometimes you get lucky.
Okay, well, while we're talking about materials, what type of eraser do you use to get rid of those blue guidelines?
Let's see. This was the eraser I was looking for before. Although white plastic erasers are always my favorite. I've used Pink Pearl and I've used some other Black Ninjas and things like that. I tend to like the white pearls the better, or these white plastic erasers, because as you come through here, and that was one of the questions, is can I stay organized, Wes? And so, no, the question was, does this blue Sorel erase? And it erases very easily. And I've used kneaded erasers sometimes before. That also works well on this Sorel. And also works well for graphite. But I just like the white because white on white seems like a good combination. But anything that works for you eraser wise, I don't have a particular brand that I'm super sold on. And I'm not sponsored by anybody. I'm not gonna say, okay, this one's better than this, you know, and then do that fake internet thing. But this is just a cute little one that I got from Blick one time because it has a pencil sharpener on one side, and then it has the eraser on the other side. So as my other job as urban sketcher, this is a nice, handy, compact way of keeping it all together. So. Is that it?
There might be one more here. They ask, how do you use font apps?
Font apps. I guess I did in that one van that I did. I generally look for fonts that look a lot like my handwriting. That's just me trying to fake you out like I did it all by hand. But there are many fonts that are created by artists that look like my handwriting. And I can also use a font app to write out by hand my handwriting and turn that into a font and then type it in. So I use it sparingly on these type of portraits, but I have used it in my day job as a graphic designer. And I just like the look of fonts that look like handwriting. Just something. But yeah, I use it sparingly on these word portraits.
Okay, thank you. Well, there's just been lots of appreciation in the chat here. Someone commented, I just noticed the words and the irises of the eyes. So cool on the more finished portrait. So thank you very much. Unless there are any other questions in our in-person audience, we'll just mention that we will include the link to that PDF in the follow-up email, as well as all kinds of links to contact Wes and all of his social media handles. And there's even a TED Talk. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's a whole different thing where I did visual note-taking at a TED Talk, which is that's a whole crazy thing like that. I'll have to do another demonstration on that someday.
Yeah, I watched it. It's really fabulous. So encourage everyone to take advantage of those, but we'll say good night. Thank you so much. And we hope to see everyone again soon. Good night.
Thank you all.